Trump's war on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs isn't just reshaping American workplaces, it's sending shockwaves across the border into Canada. A groundbreaking study by one of Canada's most prestigious law firms has revealed something alarming. Canadian companies are quietly pulling back from publicly reporting their diversity records, even as they continue these programs behind closed doors. This is the story of how Trump's DEI crackdown is creating a ripple effect that's fundamentally changing corporate behavior across North America. Fewer Canadian public companies are trumpeting their records on diversity, equity, and inclusion, though many are quietly pressing ahead with the initiatives despite the DEI backlash in the United States. This finding comes from Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt LLP, one of Canada's leading law firms, in their annual diversity disclosure report. And the timing couldn't be more significant. To understand why this matters, we need to look at what Trump has unleashed in the United States. Within hours of taking office for his second term, Trump signed multiple executive orders that didn't just end federal DEI programs, they declared war on the entire concept. Executive Order 14,151, titled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing, requires the termination of all discriminatory programs, including illegal DEI and DEIA, mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government, under whatever name they appear. But Trump didn't stop there. His administration has made it crystal clear that private companies are next in their crosshairs. The executive orders direct the Attorney General to identify private sector companies with egregious and discriminatory DEI programs, signaling potential investigations of publicly traded corporations and large nonprofits, along with litigation and potential regulatory action. Attorney General Pam Bondi has already issued a memorandum instructing the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division to investigate, eliminate, and penalize illegal DEI and DEIA, preferences, mandates, policies, programs, and activities in the private sector. The speed and scope of Trump's actions have been unprecedented. Federal employees working in DEI roles were placed on paid administrative leave within days, with many facing termination or reassignment. The administration has revoked decades-old executive orders, including some dating back to the Johnson and Clinton administrations, that required government contractors to adopt non-discriminatory practices and address environmental justice for minority populations. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and concerning. The Trump administration's aggressive stance is creating what legal experts call a chilling effect that extends far beyond American borders. Canadian companies, many of which do business in the United States or have American shareholders, are watching these developments with growing anxiety. And the data shows they're responding by becoming more cautious about how they discuss their diversity efforts publicly. The Osler study reveals a troubling trend. The shift halts a years-long pattern of increasing reporting for metrics, such as the percentages of women on boards of directors and executive teams. While the percentage of female directors among Toronto Stock Exchange-listed companies actually increased to above 30% for the first time, reaching 30.5%, the number of companies willing to talk about these achievements publicly has declined. John Valley, chair of Osler's corporate governance practice and co-author of the report, explains what's happening. What they are saying, the amount that they're saying, the way in which they are expressing it may have changed, but the core focus on diversity as an area of importance for the organization or for providers of capital-making investment decisions has not necessarily changed in the same way or at the same rate. In other words, companies are doing the work but staying quiet about it. This corporate silence represents a fascinating paradox. Despite reduced public disclosure, institutional investors still demand diversity information from companies in their portfolios. Many corporations continue to see maintaining DEI programs as essential for attracting top talent, especially as demographics change and younger workers increasingly value inclusive workplaces. The business case for diversity hasn't disappeared, but the willingness to talk about it publicly has been shaken. The implications extend beyond just corporate communications. The study found that the number of women being appointed to new or vacant board seats at TSX listed companies fell 8.5% from the previous year. The proportion of companies with written policies for identifying and nominating female directors dropped 5.5%. Nearly 8% fewer companies disclosed whether they consider representation by women when making executive appointments. This retreat from public diversity commitments is happening against a backdrop of broader regulatory uncertainty. In April 2025, the Canadian Securities Administrators, the umbrella group of provincial and territorial securities, commissions, shelved plans for disclosure rules that would have gone beyond gender diversity to address representation of Indigenous people, racialized people, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ plus individuals on boards and in executive ranks. They blame this suspension on the changing global economic and geopolitical landscape, a clear reference to the shifting political winds from the South. The timing is particularly significant because it coincides with other signs that diversity initiatives are under strain. Early in 2025, proxy advisory firm Institutional Shareholder Services announced it would no longer consider gender or racial and ethnic diversity when making vote recommendations for director elections at U.S. companies. This represents a major shift from previous practices. Here, diversity was seen as a governance best practice. What makes the Canadian situation especially complex is that the country has its own legal framework requiring diversity disclosure. The Corporate Diversity Reporting Rules, which apply to federally incorporated public companies since January 2020, require corporations to report annually on the diversity of their boards and senior management, particularly around 4 designated groups: women, visible minorities, Indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. This creates a tension between legal compliance requirements and the new political reality shaped by Trump's policies. Canadian companies find themselves caught between competing pressures. On one hand, they face domestic legal requirements and investor expectations for diversity reporting. On the other hand, they're witnessing American companies face potential legal challenges and investigations for their DEI programs. Some are resolving this tension by providing the minimum required disclosure while reducing voluntary reporting and avoiding the kind of detailed diversity commitments that were common just a few years ago. The corporate world's response to Trump's DEI crackdown has been swift and dramatic. Major American companies have already voluntarily rolled back their DEI initiatives. Following the Supreme Court's 2023 decision to overturn affirmative action, companies like John Deere, Ford, and Lowe's began scaling back their programs. More recently, Meta, Walmart, and McDonald's have joined this retreat. These moves by high-profile corporations send a clear signal to other companies about the changing political and legal landscape. But here's what's particularly striking about the Canadian response. It's happening even though Trump's executive orders don't directly apply to Canadian companies. This demonstrates the powerful influence of American political and legal trends on global corporate behavior. When the world's largest economy takes a dramatic policy shift, the ripple effects are felt everywhere, especially in a country like Canada that's so economically integrated with the United States. The study suggests that Canadian corporate leaders are making calculated decisions about risk management. Valley notes that some companies are tying diversity data directly to business impact rather than broad social objectives. There are a number of examples where the disclosure got shorter, but I think in some ways it got more meaningful because it was more tied to the underlying business and how diversity is really driving the business, creating a more resilient organization, he explains. This shift toward business-focused justifications for diversity represents a strategic adaptation to the new political climate. Instead of framing DEI as a moral imperative or social justice issue, language that has become politically charged, companies are emphasizing the business benefits: better decision-making, improved innovation, enhanced ability to serve diverse customer bases, and stronger financial performance.
With massive overspending, leaving my generation with a bill.
Honorable député de Moncton, Dieppe.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in honor of Brain Cancer Awareness Day happening this October 24th, I'd like to pay a special tribute to an incredible family who is near and dear to my heart. The Boyle family was forever changed when Andrew Boyle lost his life 10 years ago battling brain cancer back in 2022. Undeterred by such a devastating loss, his amazing wife Danielle, a friend and a former colleague of mine, and their two beautiful children, Austin and Naomi, have channeled their grief into hope and action by becoming remarkable ambassadors for the Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada. Their team, Boyle's Brainiacs, have knocked countless doors in their communities, sharing their journey with everyone and raising an amazing $6,000 for the cause in the process. Naomi and Austin have each raised $1,000 each and have not only kept the memory of their late father alive, but they also serve as shining examples for youth that deserve recognition in this house. Well done, Naomi and Austin. Your dad would be proud.
The honourable member for Kenora Kiwetanung.
Last night, the Prime Minister told a room full of students that they're going to have to make sacrifices, but they've already had to sacrifice their dream of home ownership. Over 70% of young Canadians are worried that they'll never be able to afford a down payment. They've paid the price as food costs have exploded nearly 4.
The research consistently supports these business arguments. Studies show that companies with diverse leadership teams are more likely to outperform their competitors financially. McKinsey and Company FAO, and that companies prioritizing diversity are 35% more likely to outperform competitors. Beyond financial performance, diverse and inclusive workplaces typically see higher employee retention, engagement, and productivity. Yet despite this evidence, the political backlash against DEI has been fierce and effective. The Trump administration's characterization of diversity programs as illegal and immoral discrimination has resonated with certain segments of the population and created legal uncertainty for companies. This has led to what experts describe as a risk-averse approach, where companies continue diversity efforts but avoid public discussion that might attract negative attention. The Canadian situation is further complicated by the country's different legal and cultural context. Canada has stronger anti-discrimination laws and a more supportive political environment for diversity initiatives. The Employment Equity Act requires federally regulated employers to achieve workplace equity for designated groups. The Canadian Human Rights Act prohibits discrimination based on various protected characteristics. These legal frameworks create different incentives and requirements than what exists in the United States. However, the interconnected nature of the North American business environment means that American political trends inevitably influence Canadian corporate behavior. Many Canadian companies have American subsidiaries, American shareholders, or significant American and business operations. They're naturally cautious about taking positions that might create problems in their largest market. The study reveals that this caution is translating into measurable changes in corporate behavior. Companies are becoming more strategic about how they communicate diversity efforts, often emphasizing business benefits rather than social justice arguments. They're reducing voluntary disclosure while maintaining compliance with legal requirements. Some are shifting from public diversity commitments to internal diversity goals that aren't subject to external scrutiny. This trend toward privacy in diversity efforts represents a significant change from the previous decade, when companies increasingly made public commitments to diversity and inclusion. The rise of ESG investing had created incentives for companies to publicly demonstrate their commitment to social issues, including diversity. Now, the political backlash against woke capitalism is creating counter-incentives that push companies toward discretion rather than disclosure. The implications of this shift extend beyond corporate communications to actual diversity outcomes. When companies reduce their public commitments to diversity, they may also reduce their internal accountability for achieving diversity goals. Public disclosure creates external pressure that can drive internal action. Without that pressure, there's a risk that diversity efforts could lose momentum or resources. The study's findings about declining rates of female board appointments and reduced policy commitments suggest this risk may already be materializing. While the overall percentage of women on boards continues to increase, the rate of improvement is slowing and companies are showing less commitment to formal policies that would sustain progress. This creates a concerning dynamic where progress on diversity could stall just as it was gaining momentum. Canada had been making steady progress on board diversity, with the percentage of women directors steadily climbing over the past decade. The country was also preparing to expand diversity requirements beyond gender to include other underrepresented groups. Now, that progress appears to be at risk due to political developments in another country. The broader context makes this trend even more significant. Demographic changes in North America mean that workplaces are becoming more diverse, whether companies actively promote inclusion or not. Younger generations entering the workforce are more diverse and have higher expectations for inclusive workplace cultures. Companies that retreat from diversity efforts risk losing their ability to attract and retain the best talent from these changing demographics. At the same time, global business is becoming more complex and diverse. Companies need leaders who can navigate different cultural contexts, understand diverse customer needs, and make decisions that account for varied perspectives. The business case for diversity isn't just about fairness, it's about competitive advantage in an increasingly complex global economy. The Trump administration's approach to DEI represents a fundamental challenge to this business logic. By characterizing diversity efforts as discriminatory and illegal, the administration is forcing companies to choose between their business interests and political considerations. Many are choosing political safety over business optimization, at least in their public communications.
Will this Prime Minister show some fiscal discipline and commit to not exceed his $42 billion promise in the upcoming budget?
The Honourable Secretary of State for Seniors.
We are investing in Canadians. We're investing in a future that ensures that Canada is the top of the G7 countries fiscally, whereas the Conservatives want us to achieve economic goals that will ensure that children don't have food in their bellies when they're at school. They want us to achieve the economic goals that they're looking for on the backs of Canadians. These are real programs, Mr. Speaker, not like the imaginary taxes that they keep referring to. These are things that Canadians really rely on and will ensure that all of us have what we need to position ourselves for the future.
Honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been a CPA for 26 years, and I've worked with Canadians as they navigate their personal taxes and finances under fiscal mismanagement of this Liberal government. Budgets do not balance themselves, as the Prime Minister knows well with his background. So there is no excuse to continue the fiscal disaster he inherited from his predecessor. My question is simple. Will the Prime Minister keep his promise and ensure the deficits will not exceed the outrageous $42 billion deficit of Justin Trudeau?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Excuse me.
This government...
I didn't hear the mic didn't seem to be on. Could the member start from the top, please?
Bringing out the big guns.
Canadians know that this government was elected with a strong mandate to build the strongest economy in the G7. And I know that we're on the right track. You know how I know? Because the experts say so. I know the opposition members may not agree, but who said Canada is fiscally sustainable? Former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page. Who said Canada is attracting the attention of global investors around the world? The CEO of our largest pension plan.
This creates what economists call a market failure, a situation where political interference prevents the market from reaching optimal outcomes. If diversity truly provides business benefits, then political pressure to reduce diversity efforts is forcing companies to operate less efficiently than they could otherwise. The Canadian study provides a real-time view of how this market failure is playing out. COMPA, NICE are continuing diversity efforts because they see business value, but they're reducing public discussion because of political risk. This represents a suboptimal outcome where companies can't fully leverage the reputational and stakeholder benefits of their diversity efforts. Looking ahead, the sustainability of this approach remains questionable. Institutional investors continue to demand diversity data, and many have their own commitments to ESG investing that include social factors. Consumer preferences, particularly among younger demographics, continue to favor companies that demonstrate commitment to social values. Employee expectations for inclusive workplaces haven't changed just because political winds have shifted. The study suggests that Canadian companies are trying to navigate these competing pressures by maintaining substance while reducing visibility. Valley describes this as companies becoming more meaningful in their diversity efforts by tying them directly to business outcomes, even as they become less vocal about these efforts publicly. Whether this approach can be sustained long-term depends on several factors. If the political backlash against DEI continues to intensify, companies may face increasing pressure to reduce not just their communications, but their actual diversity efforts. Conversely, if business and investor pressure for diversity continues, companies may find ways to maintain their commitments while managing political risk. The international dimension adds another layer of complexity. Many Canadian companies operate globally and must navigate different regulatory and cultural expectations in different markets. What works in the American political climate may not work in European markets, where diversity and inclusion requirements are often stronger. This creates challenges for multinational companies trying to maintain consistent global approaches. The study's findings represent more than just a corporate communications trend. They reveal how political polarization can influence business practices across national borders. Trump's DEI crackdown is demonstrating the power of American political movements to shape global corporate behavior, even in areas where other countries have different laws and values. This influence reflects the reality of North American economic integration and the outsized role of American politics in shaping global business norms. When the world's largest economy takes a strong political stance on an issue, companies everywhere must consider the implications for their American operations, shareholders, and stakeholders. The Canadian experience provides a case study in how companies adapt to political uncertainty while trying to maintain business effectiveness. The approach of continuing diversity efforts while reducing public disclosure represents a form of political risk management, maintaining substance while reducing visibility. Whether this approach proves successful will depend on how the political and legal landscape continues to evolve. If Trump's DEI policies remain in place and expand, Canadian companies may face increasing pressure to reduce not just their communications, but their actual diversity efforts. If the business case for diversity continues to strengthen, companies may find ways to maintain their commitments while managing political risks. What's clear from the study is that Trump's DEI crackdown has already succeeded in changing corporate behavior far beyond American borders. Canadian companies are making different decisions about diversity disclosure and commitments based on American political developments. This demonstrates the far-reaching influence of American politics on global business practices and the challenges companies face in navigating an increasingly polarized political environment. Our relationship with the United States will never again be the same.
Actually explaining things in a real way, and I think that there's a huge appetite for that, and that's in stark contrast to the communication style that you see from Pierre Poilievre, who is all slogans and really doesn't get into depth on almost anything.
So he's got a young audience, and we were talking about this and the kinds of things that they want to. Oh, you know what? Actually, I can just see here we've got Mark Carney is coming out to the podium, so you're off the hook, but just for a few minutes, maybe 30 or so, we're going to listen to the Prime Minister and talk to you after.
Thanks.
Thank you. Here is Mark.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame Fortier. Merci, cher Mona. Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici parmi vous. Good evening. Look, it's been a while since I was in your shoes at university. It's been a long while, actually. It's been a long while, but one of the things is that there are some similarities to our experiences. Okay? Trust me, I'm going to draw them out. The fact is, in particular, we will have both studied and entered the workforce. You will soon enter the workforce during times of immense change. Okay? And I've learned a few things since I graduated, and I've increasingly understood this point that, life doesn't proceed in a straight line. And that the history and the progress of nations are punctuated by hinge moments. Times when the future literally hangs in the balance and when our actions can be decisive. Et dans des moments comme celui-ci, Nous devons être audacieux. Il faut tracer une nouvelle voie et il faut le faire ensemble. Le Canada traverse un moment comme celui-là aujourd'hui. Les changements technologiques s'accélèrent. The world is more dangerous and divided. The U.S., as we all know, has fundamentally changed its approach to trade. It's raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. And the scale and the speed of these developments are not part of a smooth transition, they're a rupture. And they mean that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically. And they mean as well, even though we both lived through time, or I lived through time.
The story of Canadian companies quietly continuing diversity efforts while reducing public disclosure reveals the complex ways that political polarization shapes business behavior in an interconnected global economy. It shows how companies try to balance competing pressures from different stakeholders while managing political and legal risks that cross national boundaries. Most importantly, it demonstrates that Trump's war on DEI is having effects far beyond what his executive orders can directly reach, reshaping corporate behavior across North America through the power of political influence and business interconnection.